a lack of organization can cause a lot of problems and be very frustrating for an employee. Sometimes I've seen where, an offer is made, it's accepted, and they're given a start date, right? So they've given their notice, their current employer, they're excited and ready to go. And then for whatever reason, on the employer's end, oops, we had that wrong. It's actually going to be, a week or two later. That's a big problem for that individual.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Joining me this week to discuss employer brand management is Mallory Herrin. Mallory is a dual certified human resources professional, consultant, and CEO of HerrinHR, her Dallas-based consulting practice. She's also a frequent conference speaker. We're often stepping on each other's toes at conferences, and author of Intentional HR, A Revolution in Strategic Thinking. Welcome back to Good Morning HR, Mallory.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really grateful to be here.
So we were talking about this episode, and you pointed out that talent acquisitions changed, and what used to work isn't quite as effective as it used to be. So how has recruiting changed in your mind, and as you're talking to your clients, what are they saying?
Well, there's definitely a different mindset regarding what an employee expects from their employer now that we haven't seen kind of en masse like this in a really long time. So generations in the workforce, there's a ton of them, right? We've the most we've ever had. And what they each want is different. You'll probably notice when you're working with employees that your Gen Zers have very different expectations than your baby boomers. And with the digital age that we're in now and the pandemic, there's been significant shifts toward wanting more and wanting different things from employers. So if you think about back with the pandemic, we really reprioritized what's important to us, spending time with family, working remotely so we're not spending hours commuting every day, access to mental health benefits, things like that, where previously it's primarily been a, hey, I want to do this job. I want to work my way up the ranks. I want to have the respect that comes with being a loyal employee. And if you could also give me some time off and a pension, that'd be great, right? So we've had this massive shift in expectations. And with the current labor market, recruiting is already a challenge. We have 1.7 million Americans missing from the labor force since 2020, and that's from the US Chamber of Commerce. There's the global talent shortage. Korn Ferry has done some research on, and by the year 2030, which is not that far off, we're
It's
gonna
weird to say that, but yeah, we're talking 5 years, right?
right that we're gonna have 85 million people missing from the global workforce. So we have more of a scarcity in talent, in addition to reprioritizations and different things that people want from their employer. So it's a balancing act to really win the war for talent now.
Yeah, and I think unemployment is around 4% in the US, and 4% is kind of that magic number where there are qualified candidates out there, but they're sought after pretty good. And then you've got a group of people who, either because of technology changes or just the way the roles have changed, are having a harder time finding a fit for their particular skill set that they want to accept. And so it's so we've got these dynamics that have changed. Um, and we wanted to talk about employer branding because that's something you said was you're seeing as making a difference for your clients. So when we're talking about an employer brand, how do you define that?
I would define it as what people that work for you would say about the organization as an employer behind your back, which is essentially Glassdoor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's about how you are creating experiences for your workforce that align with their expectations and help them to thrive, because they're going to go tell everybody about it. And
Right.
with the scarcity talent, we have to be even more competitive. And it's a competitive advantage in relation to who you are as an employer, totally separate from whatever widgets you make, or, you know, whatever your brand image is in terms of your product or services.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time, and I think it's important talking about mission, uh, building, the story around who we serve and why what this employee does in the execution of our company strategy is important, and all of that. If the things that make somebody see value in working for the company beyond that, whether it's wages, how they're treated, what their benefits are, how they see other people treated, those things are going to trump. Oh well, we're a well-intentioned organization with a healthy mission. So, what do you think those factors are that drive what employees see as valuable in their employer?
Well, there's elements throughout their entire journey as an employee that you have to pay attention to. So, from the recruiting and attracting them, into what is their onboarding experience like? What is your total reward strategy? So, pay and benefits are still pretty important, but also we're adding into that more intentional work life balance, thought put into mental health, performance management. That makes a huge difference too, in addition to like what kind of development options are for them, career advancement, or even just professional advancement when there's not necessarily a career path in front of them. Everything that you touch throughout the employee life cycle needs to be done from a standpoint where you're prioritizing the employee's experience and how they perceive their work life. Within that, you're crafting an employer brand that it's either going to work for you or against you.
Yeah, it's like values. Every company has values. You may have one set on the wall and you're living another one, and
Hmm.
employees are unhappy. And so, and I hear employers, and you see the marketing stuff, the employer value proposition, those kind of things, which I think are valuable, but there's often a disconnect between what you hear employees say or even candidates say about what they experienced. I spend, probably too much time on Reddit and HR social media sections, and you see what appear to be normal, sane people who tell stories about what happened at this employer or that employer when they were going through the interview process, and it seems like it really flies in the face of the way that company is portraying their employer value proposition.
Absolutely. And you'll notice on social media, there are videos all the time, or at least on my For You
Yeah.
page that I've built brick by brick. There are these videos of, how do you professionally say, I'm not going to do that? Or what kind of things to look for in your boss or in your environment that you need to hurry up and get out of there. And even things like if they say during the interview that we're a family here, run.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that family idea there, I don't think anybody ever meant to suggest that we're a family, but we work closely together, we're supportive of each other, we carry each other. But in a time where some jobs are getting replaced by AI, and we're finding efficiencies that are good for the overall company, and its survival, but we're doing it with fewer people, and maybe we're proactively exiting people from the organization rather than waiting for attrition. You don't do that with family. And so, or not happy families. And so maybe we need to tone down that family language. And I'm not sure that especially younger employees are looking for a family, right? It used to be you'd stay with an employer for 40 years. That outlasted many marriages. But we're not doing that anymore.
No, and the career coaches that you'll see online, they're actively telling people you should leave your employer within 2 to 3 years, because instead of getting your 3 to 5% increase year over year, if you get it at all, you can jump up 20% or more by
Yeah.
switching to a different company. It's that competitive in the market. And if you're that person, of course you're going to take that advice.
Yeah, and I talk to employers and employees all the time who say, my company has a maximum increase you can get even if you take a promotion or take another role in the organization someplace else. Even if it puts you outside of below the salary band, they're gonna, they may move me to the very bottom of the salary band, but then I may not get a raise for 3 years because I'm still, my wage progression hadn't caught up. But I can leave the company for 6 months or a year and come back and get that full dollar, get everything. And so you have to ask, are we shooting ourselves in the foot here? Is this talent really that valuable? And if it is, then, if it's not, if you're not willing to pay them now, but you're willing to pay them in a year to come back, what are we doing here? Right.
Oh, yeah, it's chaos. And there's so many things that you can do because then it becomes how do we attract people and then how do we retain them? And if we have restrictions on ourselves in terms of their increases to salary, what else can we do? And even if you're leading the market in compensation, people don't just leave because they want more money. Most of the time, they leave because it's a toxic environment and
Mhm.
especially an unsupportive manager. So, what can you do to create an atmosphere where people can thrive and they genuinely want to be there?
Yeah. And we spend so much time building an employee skill set, and that manager, too often, the incentive is for that direct manager to keep the team together, right? I mean, I've got all this time invested here. This team works well. I don't need people promoting out of my team into another team is how they see it, because I'm going to bring in a wild card. And most managers aren't that great at selecting talent, so when they get somebody that, they're taking a high risk that they're going to return, bring in a lower performer into that role, and they don't want to deal with it. And so they discourage employees, or they don't encourage them to grow beyond their role, to learn other things, to become more valuable to the company. They're not worried about the total company value. They're worried about keeping their team together and producing to hit their numbers.
It really takes a complete step back and taking a look at everything holistically with a different lens because there are companies that are crafting employee experiences that get them top talent and they retain their talent. And it's not just lip service, but it's not necessarily something that you can affect overnight. And there are things that you can do immediately, but then it also takes real intentional cultivation over the long term.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we're talking about employee brand management, right? But when the rubber hits the road, can you really manage an employee brand, or what is that just it could either just be marketing. I mean, you're in the Navy now, right? So, join the Navy, see the world, all of that. Oh yeah, yeah. Then I go to boot camp, and I'm peeling potatoes, and I'm sitting in some place that I didn't want to be, and it's hot and stinky, and there's flies, and I'm getting shot at. That's not seeing the world as it's a different environment than what I was sold when I was recruited. But I think a lot of employers may have that too. We've got good marketing, but then when people are actually in the environment, it's a different experience. So is it, when we're talking about employee brand management, what we're really talking about is just making this a place people want to work, right? I mean, is that basically it? But then I think there's also that part, that employer value proposition, where we've got to figure out how we explain to the outside world how amazing it really is and who our messenger for that is. Because I think if your PR firm or your marketing firm is the messenger, you're really missing a lot there.
Oh, yeah, it should be your current employees. I think that it can get a little too sus, as the kids would say, if you're only seeing it from that marketing and PR standpoint. It can tell someone, wow, you're spending an awful lot of money on these kind of ads. Could that money have maybe gone into some employee programs? Because they're going to want to know and hear from people that have actually experienced it and actually worked there. And there's a lot of things that you can do. You can control and influence as much as possible. At the end of the day, how someone experiences their tenure at your organization, you don't have complete control over that. But you can definitely make a big impact and shift it to be very positive. And it's a lot of little things that you do throughout every day that
Right.
influence of it.
Well, so let's go through the employee life cycle then. Let's start with recruiting and employee selection. In that process, what do you think the things that employers mess up in that selection process with candidates that gives the company a negative reputation with the outside talent pool?
I think that for starters, posting about a job and not leading with culture can be harmful, but you also have to make sure that is an accurate representation of your culture. You've
Mhm.
probably seen job postings, they go viral here and there about like, hey, do you love ping pong in the afternoon? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
If you can lead with that because that's actually your culture, fantastic. But if you're just trying that as a style choice for your posting, people are going to be pretty upset if they get the job and come in and they're like, this is not what I was sold. I also think it's really important to utilize technology in a way that shortens the time frame from first applying to a decision on selection. And one of the biggest things I see is, and I get it because we have applicant tracking systems, right? We want to make things easier for the recruiters that are reviewing everything. But if you're going to ask me as a candidate to upload my resume and then fill out in your own questionnaire
Mhm.
everything that is on my resume, you're frustrating people. And a
Right.
lot of people will just abandon it altogether at that point. I also think that employers are really missing the mark when it comes to communication and timing. There's either an extreme lack of communication where people that are excited about the opportunity have to be, and follow up is good. But if they're the ones that have to continue following up and they're
Hmm.
getting crickets, that's a problem. And especially in this market, because if we're all fighting for a smaller talent pool, if you're not on the ball, then they're going to get scooped up by somebody else. And I think that the timing of it, taking too long to get from, hey, we did a phone screening, then we're going to bring you in for an interview, from that until, we make a decision, you're not hearing from anybody, and we're not
Hmm.
making a decision for another 3 weeks to a month. Again, you're going to lose people. And having an endless number of interviews
Right.
can be very problematic.
Yeah, it's crazy how many posts I see where I'm a mid-level software engineer, uh, and there's 5 interviews,
Yeah.
and two panel interviews, the direct supervisor, then the director, or even the VP. Um, that just tells me this organization doesn't really know what they're looking for. They don't have a good way to measure what they're looking for. Uh, And if I was the candidate, I'd be very concerned about what the rest of their decision making processes look like.
Oh, yeah.
Is this an organization that doesn't take risk, that nobody wants to be accountable for a decision, so they push them off as long as they can? That would be a giant red flag to me. But I hear about these things all the time.
Well, and unfortunately, it's more of the norm than the exception. And think about somebody with, because a lot of employers, they prefer candidates that are actively employed somewhere because they unfairly assume that if
Hmm.
you're currently not employed somewhere, there's something wrong with you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if their preference is for people that are actively employed, if you're making them take off time from work that often, that's an issue. They're using their PTO for that probably.
Hmm.
Or if it's just unpaid, that's still, it's not great. It's not ideal. I think that if you are able to really advertise yourself through your job posting to explain who you are as an employer and give them a lot of information, that's step one. And look, if you have a good employer brand, like if you have 5 stars on Glassdoor, link that in your job post.
Hmm.
If you have real employees doing testimonials that don't look like they're being held hostage and
Or
reading a
written by
script,
AI. Yeah.
yeah. then do a video and post that, or link to where they can go watch that. That's step one. That sets the tone for, hey, we care about your experience. We're going to be real transparent about who we are, so that when you come in, we've done our homework. We've read through your resume. We have very targeted questions that we're going to ask you. But from a technical standpoint, let's get as much of that out of the way before we do an in-person interview. And then let that be a conversation about cultural fit.
Yeah. And I always say for probably 70% of the roles out there, you can bring somebody up to competency on the skill set if they've got the aptitude and the basic experience. But making somebody who's not a good fit, and it's not their fault, and it's not your fault they're not a fit. I mean, right? I love a job posting that really describes the job in a way that it's not going to fit. So it's going to turn off candidates who are fully qualified, but who wouldn't want to work in that role because of the, so like our job postings for our analyst roles talk about it as a repetitive, high level data entry. 70% of it is just, you're sitting in front of 2 or 3 computer monitors all day long. Something that I would shoot myself if I had to do that job. But I wouldn't want to be one of my analysts. I wouldn't want to do that job all day, every day. And they wouldn't want to do what I do. And so, but where if you can get the wrong candidate to opt out and attract the right candidate with how you say it and how you describe it. And it, it doesn't have to say, this is a horrible place to work. It just describes the job in a way that makes you say, this is who's going to thrive here. Somebody who likes this environment, and somebody who's not is, should keep looking, and best of luck. God bless, go find it. But last thing on recruitment, give me your feedback. I know HR folks are overworked. There's a ton of applicants, but at what point do you think the recruiter or the hiring manager, either just basically owes that candidate some phone call back? Is it just after a phone screen, or is it after an in-person interview or a phone call, or where do you think that comes in? Because at some point we're going to have to start reaching back out to candidates, because
Yeah.
it's killing brands, and it's really making employees or candidates cynical about the whole process.
Well, and sometimes it's even automated. And look, if you're going to do that, update that message so that it's using the correct name for the candidate and makes sense to what their experience was.
Yeah, you get that
I
email that says, "Dear, insert name here." Yeah,
Yes.
right. Yeah,
I think that it's time for a phone call to that candidate after they've had an interview, not a screening. If you were qualifying that screening, so every time you talk to them, you should be letting them know what the next step is, when they should expect to hear back from you, and it needs to be realistic. And if you need more time, you get back to them within that time frame you said you would, to say, hey, we need more time. So at the end of a phone screening, what I like to do is tell them, hey, the next step, we're going to be looking at different individuals that have applied. If you're selected for the next step, I will call you and we will schedule that. If not, you'll get an email. I think that once they've spent the time, even in a virtual interview, but it's not the screening, it's an actual interview,
hmm
then we need to give them the courtesy of a phone call letting them know.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. Identity fraud in employment is on the rise. Dishonest job seekers are using fake or stolen identity information to apply for and actually obtain employment. And we're not just talking about undocumented workers who are maybe using a fabricated SSN or someone else's identity. In fact, if you've watched my webinar on preventing remote worker fraud, you know that the North Korean government has, for the last decade, been stealing U.S. tech workers' identities and then using that information to get real remote work jobs with U.S. companies, violating U.S. sanctions and perpetrating frauds against those employers. In order to better protect our clients, Imperative is introducing new tools to prevent identity fraud. With our new biometric identity verification process, we validate the identity documents candidates present and use AI to capture a video selfie of the individual and verify that it matches the photo on their ID. and the whole process takes less than 5 minutes. For more information on this cutting edge service, reach out to me or visit our website at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 3/4 of a recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 209 and enter the keyword brand. That's BRAND. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Mallory Herrin. And I'm not sure what the psychology is. I think some employers are afraid they're going to get questions if they make the phone call part. Well, what could I have done better? Or what was it, what I do wrong, and those kind of things. And I'm always telling applicants when they, because they bring that topic up, and how, they'll call and say, hey, could you coach me on this or whatever? And we'll talk through it. I'm like, the real issue is they just found a better candidate. I mean, and I get it. Every candidate thinks they're the most qualified person for the job. And, sometimes you've got better skills, but this other person really is going to bring something different, a different dynamic, a different insight, a different experience level, something different that was attractive to that employer. Is it always the right criteria? No. I mean, every manager has their own ideas, their own bias, their own secret insight into the human soul, and they're going to decide sometimes about who they're going to bring in based on some of that criteria. And if they're good at it, they're going to build a really good team that works well together and does all of that. And if they're not, they're going to pay for it eventually, because
Yeah.
you're going to end up with a bunch of skilled people who don't work well together. So.
And you still need to manage that candidate's experience too, even if you don't select them, because that
Right.
can damage your employer brand. Because it's like when you go to a restaurant, and not that I do this, I'm an angel, but you go to a restaurant, it's, food's bad, service is bad, and then a lot of people, what do? They
They
go
get
on
on
Yelp.
Yelp. Yeah.
Yeah. And they give a bad review. People are far more likely to spread the news about a bad experience than they are a positive one. So keep that in mind when you're interacting with candidates that aren't selected, because they'll go on Glassdoor and slam you too, just for your candidate experience.
And it's all out there. So once we pick that employee, let's say we get to the selection process, we identify our candidate, we make them the offer, and then we onboard them. So let's go through the offer process and onboarding. Where do you see employers screwing that up?
A lack of organization can cause a lot of problems and be very frustrating for an employee. Sometimes I've seen where, an offer is made, it's accepted, and they're given a start date, right? So they've given their notice, their current employer, they're excited and ready to go. And then for whatever reason, on the employer's end, oops, we had that wrong. It's actually going to be, a week or two later. That's a big problem for that individual.
Right.
And I've also seen, if you're not communicating, hey, I'm sending you an offer, if it's contingent, which it should be on background
Mm-hmm.
screening, right? Then you have to explain that to people, and then explain, what do you need to bring with you on day one? Let's say you pass that background screening, everything's good to go. On your first day, we need you to have your documents to fill out your I-9. You need to be prepared to, complete your W-4, have your bank account information ready, all of that. It's a lack of prepping someone for that first day that can be really frustrating. People just want to feel like they matter, right? So
Right.
if you've hired me and I have no idea that now I have to do a background screening, and now I'm doing like a personality assessment or some other form of test that I didn't know was coming, that's going to create confusion. And then if I don't know that you don't have a parking lot, but I can go pay for parking a couple blocks down, well, now I'm going to be late on my first day because I'm
Right.
trying to figure out where to park. Oh, you're taking me out to lunch on my first day? Excellent. I brought my leftovers that I was really looking forward to, and I'd rather go to lunch with everyone, but now I won't be able to have these leftovers.
Yeah.
It seems like really insignificant stuff, but it makes a big difference.
And having that person's email account set up,
Hmm.
and maybe they have to go through training to get security training, all that. But the minute that's done and set that up ready for them, it's amazing how many professional, white collar professionals with degrees and the whole nine, all the experience say, yeah, the first week I just sat around. I didn't have anything to do. I was waiting for the manager to come give me, some orientation, but he was busy or she was on vacation that week. So they just told me just to hang out. And, and I'm like, this is not how we should do this. And if brand aside to the outside world, you're branding to this employee right now about their role, the importance of the role to the organization. You're telling them, oh, this is a job that we can do without for a week, and we're glad to pay you to sit here. I mean, that's not the kind of company somebody wants to work for.
No. And every action or inaction that you take as the employer communicates something to that individual. There has to be the in advance preparation work for the manager and that team to really make us a great first impression. Well, second, since you've already done the interview, right?
Right.
I recommend that people not only get all that kind of stuff ready to go and have like some swag for them or like their favorite candy, whatever it is. But in addition to that, have an actual schedule built out for the first 2, 3 weeks of this is what you're going to be doing at this time with this person. Then you're going to go meet Sally over there and learn about that department. And so they have an understanding, and it's not free of activity for
Right.
significant chunks of time until toward the end when you're starting to give them, independent work after they've done a lot of the training. And having a performance milestone chart or something that you can give them, I think is really important too. So a lot of us do a 90-day introductory period. Okay, well, at the end of each 30 days, what should I know and have accomplished? When
Exactly.
you leave
What's
it unclear, you're not setting someone up to be successful.
Yeah, we call it a competency roadmap because we're doing all the training in house. Nobody's coming into our organization who's done background checks before. It's just not. We won't even hire somebody who's done it someplace else because they've got such bad habits. Every time we've done it, we've tried. It was retraining the bear. So we found it's a lot easier to do it, to bring somebody in and train them from scratch. But we know at 30 days they should, or really actually 2 weeks they should be here, and we've got the whole training and everything before they're able to operate independently without a peer reviewing everything that they complete that goes to a customer. And they understand how our compensation works with competencies, and so every time they achieve a new competency milestone over their career, that's how they get raises. And so you can pretty much figure out an organization who's making what, because you know what their competencies are, who can pick up what kind of job. But at least we've got that plan there. And I think too often that's what employees want to know,
Oh, yeah.
especially younger employees. They want to know, what's the next step in my career? How do I get to the next step? So let's talk about that. Once they're on board, they're employees, they're showing up, they're sitting in their cubicle or wherever doing their job. What's the low hanging fruit that employers can make sure they cover to pick up the brand there?
Making sure that you're transparent, just like what you're doing in terms of compensation is important, but also in career path options. And I've even done it with some clients where we'll create the kind of common career path for a particular position, starting entry level, and then there are these 5 different roles before you get to the executive level, or however many there are, right? Or an alternative, maybe you've done some lateral moves, or there's got crossover with a different department. So if you're more interested in that kind of work, you can see where you could go. And if it's not overly complex, because it needs to be simple enough for everyone to understand and feel they have control over that path, we put it on the job descriptions. We, even sometimes putting it in a job posting, just, hey, these are your different options here. And meeting with that individual more than just once a year at a performance evaluation to check in with, hey, what are your career goals? And you have to be okay with it if the goals they have for themselves don't, in the long term, result in them remaining with you as the employer until they retire. And a lot of people, they're going to get in a position where they can only go so far. So if there's not any additional options to be promoted, prepare them for their next role at a different employer, promoted into the role they're looking for. And I know that sounds really counterproductive, but it works. And you will get that individual to be more engaged. They'll stay longer. If you continue to make that investment in their professional development, again, you're protecting your employer brand. You're giving a good experience to this individual that if they talk to their friends about it, say, wow, your employer will do that. Well, I want to go work for him. It makes a
Right.
difference.
And, it's the old saw that, I'm afraid to train my employees because they'll leave and go work for the competition. But the flip side of that is, well, that means that you're going to have untrained employees. I mean, you're going to
Hmm.
have people who aren't growing and aren't engaged and are just, serving their time here. And that's expensive and, well beyond the wage you're spending. It's just that hurts innovation. It hurts teamwork, collaboration, all those things. Um, so the time comes where the organization has to exit people. Maybe it's a layoff, just the realities of the market. Or maybe somebody's for cause needs to be moved out of the organization. Where do you see employers affecting negatively impacting their own brands there?
Ooh, that is one that is such a short moment in time, but makes a really big difference. Because if you screw that one up and you let someone leave really mad, more mad at you than they realistically
Hmm.
should be because of the way you handled that exit, it's going to be on Google, it's going to be on Facebook, it's going to be on, it can be everywhere.
Yeah, and
So,
there'll be and if it's a bunch of people at once, it's going to be all over TikTok and you'll hear about it. We've
oh
seen
yeah,
that with multiple layoffs and things where it was handled pretty poorly. And the next thing you know, somebody's doing TikToks or Reels or whatever, talking about it and sharing the awful Zoom calls that they had with a
oh
group
yeah.
of people and all of that. Yeah.
I think that for starters, you have to put yourself in that individual's shoes. How would you feel if you had no warning and were coming onto a Zoom with 30 different people or however many? It's not personalized. They're just telling you this as this group. You're muted and can't ask questions. That is really frustrating. You are communicating to this group of people. We do not value you as human individuals. I would want to go tell everybody about that too. I get it. And I understand that perhaps there could be an argument made that having individual meetings with people is too time consuming. Then you would need, at least, if you can't do that, at least make it really small groups, 2 to 3 people at a time, if you can't do it one on one. And treating people with dignity and respect, even if they are being exited from the organization for cause. Let's say they engaged in some misconduct and now it's time to say goodbye. You can still handle that termination in a way that retains their dignity and helps you to protect that employer brand,
Mhm.
because that is probably one of the, if after the candidate experience, the exit experience is one of those opportunities for things to go so wrong for that person
Mhm.
that they are significantly more likely to go talk about you online. If you can answer questions, if you can offer transition help, even if it's outplacement services, even if you don't go with an outplacement services firm, if your HR department has the bandwidth to say, hey, we're happy to look over your resume, something like that, then that can make a huge difference too. Because that's a terrifying feeling. You've just had the rug pulled out from under you, even if you saw it coming, right? So how do you soften that landing in a way that, yes, you still want to protect yourself from potential claims, but also you're dealing with a human being?
Well, and if you want to protect yourself from claims, treating people with respect and compassion during that hardest moment of their career will go a long way. And I've been involved in over my career in multiple layoffs, helping lay off hundreds of people at a time. And sometimes we didn't have choice because of the organization's circumstances, but to do it all at the same time at the same day with conference rooms full of people and just laying out. But being organized and being able to say, okay, here's what the severance agreement says. Here's what the content is. This is what you're getting in exchange for it. This is what you're agreeing to. Here's your Cobra paperwork. Here's all of that, and having everything ready so that they walk out, they know what their next steps are. They've got a plan. Those people aren't going to just go home and wonder what's next.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you've got. You've got to fill out this paperwork. You need to do this. You've got 30 days to execute this. Whatever it is, these are the things that are lined up ahead of you. That at least gives them something to work on and to get and to be busy rather than to sit there and fume and wonder, what do I do next?
Oh, yeah. If you leave anything open to assumption, then that can be pretty risky. And if there's things that you can do to, like, let's say that you have to let somebody go, but it was a great experience for them, or if they're leaving of their own accord, we want to make sure that those are really positive experiences too.
Yeah.
And we can ask them, hey, can you go rate us on Glassdoor? If we're fairly confident that it's going to be positive, maybe don't ask everybody.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The one with your shoe print on his butt on the way out, you may not want, you
Not so
just,
much.
forget about Glassdoor. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Glassdoor you mentioned, but how do you measure if I'm an employer and I want to get a sense for what my employee brand really is versus what we would like it to be? How do I measure that?
So it's going to be a multifaceted approach. First, you need to regularly be soliciting feedback from them. Managers need to have a real pulse on what's the actual sentiment, not just the, well, we're going to tell you this because you'll get mad if I don't, right? We need that. And it goes back to management is a completely different skill set than anything else. And most managers get into roles because they have technical proficiency, and
Right.
that's totally different. There's a lot of
Yeah.
value in knowing the.
That's the Good Morning HR drinking game.
Oh,
We take managers who are skilled at what they do. We put them in a role to supervise other people without giving them those skills, and we end up losing a really technical, good employee and creating a bad manager and a bad experience for the rest of that team. So, cheers. Throw it down my Good Morning HR. One of these days, I'm going to actually bring some tequila up here and have it sitting on my desk, but it could make for a more interesting podcast. So,
right.
yeah, training managers, I think, is one of the critical things. And like I said, this whole brand thing is really just another way of looking at, is this a place people want to work? And if you want to create an environment where people really thrive and want to work and want to bring their friends to the same employer, boils down to having managers who understand what it means to lead and get rid of the term manager, because you can't manage people. You can lead them, you can incentivize them, you can respond to their needs in a way that makes them want to be a part of your team. Uh, but if we don't do that part, no matter how good you're bringing in, the quality of candidates you're bringing in, you're going to spoil them. You're going to lose them real quick.
Oh, yeah. If you don't already have a pretty good position with how you're doing things internally and managing that employee experience, it is not time to go external and start getting employee testimonials and encouraging people to rate you online. You have to get your house cleaned up first. Then you move to that external leveraging. If you are having the managers keep a good pulse on the sentiment that is the reality, and utilizing, I mean, like almost every HR tech platform has some kind of survey component.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, you could go on SurveyMonkey. I think you can do like for free quizzes or surveys up to 10 questions or something. Um, Soliciting feedback regularly in both of those ways, so you have a quantitative way to measure it and a qualitative way to measure it, in addition to your exit interviews, your regular review of what is being said about you as an employer online.
Mhm.
Make your Indeed employer profile, make your Glassdoor employer profile, and go in there and actively manage it. And if you're like, wow, we're not doing too bad, but we've only got 2 reviews. All right, go to your high performers in the company and ask them to go do it. And I think that there might be hesitation because you do need to clean up your own house first before you go external. But that doesn't mean that it has to be perfect where everyone's getting exactly what they want. That's highly unlikely for anyone anywhere. It's about being transparent and how you're communicating messages to your employees verbally and through your actions and inactions. It is perfectly okay to say, hey, we're a smaller employer. We didn't make as much revenue as we thought we would this year. So we're not going to be able to do X amount of raises like we had hoped to. It puts you in a vulnerable position, but I think everybody can understand things like that and would rather know, because again, if you leave things up to assumption, it's
Right.
going to be pretty negative.
That whole thing about being transparent about finance and about our place in the market and employees, I think sometimes management lives in that so much they assume it's all filtered down to the frontline employees, and often employees don't know, and there's uncertainty. And I've got a friend who works in HR in change management for a very large corporation, and they're laying people off, and the whole change management team is like, hey, we could help with this. And it's no, y'all stay away. And basically they've got the gut feeling that, oh, we're next. That's what they're telling us, right? And whereas if you had people who actually know how to introduce change to an organization being involved in the process, and executives didn't have all their cards right up against their chest all the time, then maybe you would be more successful in how you exit people. And but that uncertainty, if you think there's a layoff coming, am I in the next one? Sometimes it's unavoidable, but sometimes we're afraid to be honest with employees about, yeah, this is the circumstances we're in. And maybe it's, yeah, we're getting a lot more efficient because of this technology, and we just are not, it doesn't, we're not going to have these roles. Some of you we will be able to cross train and do other things. Some of you are going to exit the organization. Here's how the decisions will be made. Here's what the process is going to look like. This is the kind of notice we're going to try to give you. So, I think that's going to go a lot better than, and it's an awful conversation to have, but it's going to go a lot better than everybody knowing something's going on, nobody trusting management, to be honest with them. And whatever effort you have to get out the door, whatever process you've got to do to get actual work done is going to get diluted, and it's not going to be the product that you want to present.
Yeah. And I think that when you're in a situation like that, there's always the risk that people are just going to up and leave that same day and leave you high and dry. But the likelihood of that happening is increased exponentially if you are giving them a bad experience as an employee. If you are being transparent and fair and considerate of their experience throughout that employee life cycle, it still sucks, but they're probably going to be a lot more likely to be understanding and not just up and leave.
It just makes sense. But well, speaking of leaving, we're way up on time. I thank you for, I stole more time than I promised from you, but thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it, Mallory.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening. And then share this episode on your favorite social media platform, wherever it is. We get so many listeners just from people finding us that way. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. Good Morning HR is produced by Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral on Imperative's marketing team. The Good Morning HR theme music was created by Steve Pegler at HR Strategies of Texas. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.